My dudes, what's happening, man? It's Trent. As you know, man, I've done comic books, I've done video games, and I've even done a little bit of a manga, American kind of a style manga. And this image had been passed around for some time. It's something I've posted several times. It shows the hard work of a dedicated manga artist. This is the schedule, supposedly, and this is alleged. I don't know how accurate this is, but this is the schedule of Shibashi Hiroshi. He is a manga artist who's most well known for this comic, Nura, Rise of the Yokai Clan. And I've never read this manga. I don't know if it's good, but I do look at this schedule and a lot of things come to mind. A lot of things that I want to fix. Now, maybe this schedule, as just a little bit of a disclaimer before I dig into this, if you are struggling with a schedule, looking at something like this is going to be intimidating, and it might even make you think, well, screw it. I don't want to draw manga. I don't want to draw comics. But this is not a sustainable schedule. And this is also coming from an American perspective. I mean, you know, we are hardworking people as a country. Like, I mean, we do put a lot of emphasis on work, you know, as opposed to some other countries where we're considered workaholics and to an unhealthy degree. And then in other countries, we're considered lazy. So this is going to vary depending on where you live. But I have found that being a workaholic in my 20s, where I did have a schedule, something like this, into now where I have a little bit more of a manageable schedule, I thought I could lend some insight. So I'm going to revise this. I don't want to say fix, but I'm going to fix it for somebody who might be just looking to figure out a schedule for themselves. Because most of us, when we really track our hours of work that we do in a day, we're probably looking at something that looks a little bit more like this. And hey, this is a stress-free life. This is pretty good. This is taking it easy. You got a lot of free time, you know, for hanging out and taking 2-hour showers or 2-hour dinners. And you know, some of us, and if we're being honest with ourselves, some of us even struggle to do this, you know, 6 hours of storyboarding in a day, you know. And I'm not pointing fingers, man. I didn't say you. I've had days like this. But going back to, you know, Mr. Shibashi Hiroshi's schedule, you know, there's a lot of things that he's not accounting for. I mean, for one, he's only got himself 3 hours of free time in a week. And this is an unsustainable life. I mean, maybe if you're like 25 and it's like, you know, sure. If you don't have a dating life, you're not married, you don't have any family obligations, you never get into a car accident because you don't have a car. I don't know. In Japan, a lot of people in cities don't have cars. So, I mean, maybe there's some accuracy to that. You know, I also think not having time for a significant other or even having time to enjoy your life at all can, at some point, it takes its toll. And I don't think that's entirely healthy. So I don't see this as a sustainable schedule. So there's some things that I wanted to move around. And in fact, I want to dig in a little bit more on this before I move on, because we do have to define some terminology here. The way that this is set up is saying that storyboarding, that's like when you're doing your thumbnails for your page layouts, your panels, and choosing camera angles and things like that, based on the scenario. The scenario is when you're kind of writing out the story, and then storyboarding is when you're kind of writing out the story, adding in the dialogue to the panels, and then the manuscript is the actual time when you're fine-tuning and putting in all the final illustration touches. You'll notice that after storyboards and everything is set up, that's when the assistants arrive on a Wednesday at what looks like about 11 a.m. So I am making some assumptions here, but it's a fair assumption that the assistants would arrive after the scenario has been set up, the storyboards have been laid out, and it's go time. It's time to actually do production. So that's my understanding of these breakdowns. Also, manga only has one color illustration for the cover every week. So this is, by the way, to clarify, manga, a lot of times manga will release 16 to even 20 pages in 1 week. And this is impossible to do without a schedule, something like what you're looking at, and having assistance. And it's also, again, I wouldn't say very sustainable for very many years. You might be able to do a couple of months of something like this if you're really determined and you've got a lot of focus, but a lot of us don't, especially in today's society. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and made a, this is what I feel is a sustainable schedule. And you might be looking at this and going, man, there's a lot of free time on there, and there's a lot of sleep on there compared to, what Mr. Shibashi has on his schedule. And you might be thinking, oh, this looks like a lazy schedule, but there's actually a good chunk of stuff in here, and it does leave a lot of room for keeping on a schedule, keeping on a production schedule, and also finishing your project, even if you were to do this over a long enough period of time. Because with that other schedule, somebody might burn out after a couple of months and go, I don't even want this. But with this, it's something you could actually do and not have health issues and not have issues with your family. This is a schedule for somebody who has relationships. This is a schedule for somebody who has hobbies. This is a schedule for somebody who also is in production and realistically getting still 40 hours a week. This is still 40 hours a week. And let's break it down a little bit more. First of all, I've moved 8 hours of sleep every night pretty consistently. Now I've shifted this a little bit myself, but for the most part, I think 8 hours of sleep is pretty good for your well-being. Okay, especially if you're doing the next part. Now, free time here, I've listed this for things like one, hitting the gym in the morning, essential. Okay, in the Shibashi's schedule, he has 3 hours a week. He's not getting exercise. That's not healthy, man. And I don't care who you are. If you want to argue that with me, I will fight you on that. I will fight you physically because you don't have any workout, and I will crush you. No, hitting the gym or having some kind of activity, even if it's just going for a morning walk, this is something that no matter what age you are, you're going to need to get up out of your chair. You're going to need to actually move around. Okay, so I've allocated 2 hours for that. That's also like shower time, and that's also checking your emails and just ultimately like staying in touch with people that matter. That's your morning email time. I have a Twitter, so I have to do some marketing stuff. So like things like that fit into that category for me. Then I immediately go into, some initial sketching of things. Now, I'm not making a comic right now, this minute per se, but this is relevant to specifically to a manga artist's or a comic book artist's schedule. I think setting aside your Monday to do scenario and storyboarding, I think is a solid approach. Now, I only do, by the way, you'll notice I took out breakfast. I only do 2 meals a day. The occasional snacking, if I'm to be honest. Okay, you guys might have noticed. But I tend to just do lunch and dinner, and that's also family time. I work at home, so my wife works at home with me. So technically, that's time that we're together. I think that's important. Then what we've got here is let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours just straight of storyboarding. Now that does not account for, if you've got to walk the dog, if you've got a phone call. There are ways though, when we're looking at a schedule like this, that we can begin to kind of go, well, wait a minute, maybe I could keep up with some of my friends while, on the phone, while I'm working, while I'm drawing, for example. And this doesn't account for, by the way, if you have a social media presence, which in today's era, I don't know if there are a lot of manga artists who do have YouTube channels or Twitch or anything like that, but streaming your art, really important for getting people involved in what it is that you're doing. So you want to find ways to combine, things that you're doing, like even watching films or listening to music or podcasts while you're drawing, but being very careful to not let those things be distractions for you, or else you very quickly fall into the routine of doing something like this where you've got 3 hours of free time and you didn't realize you only actually worked on your book for 3 hours that day, and you spent most of your day watching YouTube videos or watching movies. So you want to be very careful of that sort of a thing. But even starting to track your hours in a day and doing something like a schedule like this, if you were to really sit down and track this, you might find that you spend more free time than you do that you realize that you do. So what I've done here is I've said, okay, so after dinner, you might, go back to your drawing desk for like an hour and just fix up some of the work that you did for the day. In fact, then when you go to bed at night, there's free time in the evening. This is specifically, by the way, I set up a good chunk of free time in the evenings because, again, this is for somebody who might have children. This is for somebody who might have a significant other. This is for somebody who wants to have a long-term balanced life. Maybe you decide to hit the gym at night. Maybe you go for long walks. Maybe you got tennis club. Maybe you've got something that you're into. Maybe you're gaming, and I think that is important to pull inspiration. Going out to see a movie. In the manga artist schedule here, when we go back, there's no time here to go and see a movie. What kind of a life is that? What kind of existence is that? It's not enough. It's not going to be sustainable. So I've set aside a decent amount of balanced time in the evenings, but you'll notice, we'll get to it in a moment here when we get a little bit of free time in the midweek. But so the next day on Tuesday, you're going to spend your mornings probably fixing up things that you did from the previous day. And that's kind of storyboarding out most of what you're going to need for that week. And it might be very sloppy. Thumbnails for storyboards are usually pretty sloppy, okay? But you've got that color illustration, and you're going to spend 5 hours working on that. And this might even go over, by the way. You might end up going like, yeah, you know what? Like it's not as good as I want. So like maybe, move that down, and you've got yourself, I have my grids on here. Maybe you get yourself an extra hour in the evenings after dinner. You're like, you know what? I want to just touch up. I have friends of mine who just work all night, by the way. If you're if you're wondering if this is like most people I know, it's not. Okay, most people I know are actually workaholics. Very successful people tend to be. But I don't think that's necessarily healthy. And so like I do think that there's flexibility here. And that's the point I wanted to get to, is to like say, be flexible. In fact, you'll see here that on Wednesday, I have a little bit of time after lunch where I think that it's important to maybe Wednesdays or midweek, once a week, you go out and you have a long lunch with a friend. I do think that that is important if you're staying on schedule with all this other stuff. But you notice here at the end of the day after dinner, you're making up that time. And that's important to have that kind of self-awareness to like go, whoa, man, I really blew a lot of time hanging out with friends during lunch. That is important. And I would never say that it's not. But if you're blowing off work, you're going to trade one for the other, and your friends aren't going to pay your bills 99% of the time. I've never had friends offer to pay my bills. So while it's important to make time for people and socializing and having that healthy balance, I think it's also important to remember to make up a little bit of that time where you can. And for me, I tend to stay up late, so sometimes I end up just working at 1 a.m. Like I said, I shift this down a little bit, and some nights I only get 7 hours of sleep because I wake up early. That's not very, very common though. By the way, I have something in here I wanted to mention, and I want to circle this. This is very important, and it's something that was hard for me. Oh, I have my grid on, so it's jagged. Assistants arrive. Okay, now in the scenario of doing a comic book or a manga, in the case of a manga, they have an office space or they have a shared space where they sit down together and draw their comics. So this is for the writer and the director. So this is for Shibashi. So like he's going to have he's handling scenario and script and storyboards. He hires assistants to handle inking and backgrounds and tightening things up and polishing. And he's probably got 3 or 4 assistants. And a lot of successful manga do. This would be a period of time from Wednesday to Friday where they're focused on helping him out with what he's doing in that situation. They're not playing games and just hanging out, by the way. This isn't like 3 days of hanging out with your bros. This is actually like getting stuff done. Now, I do this every weekday from 9 to 5, or I guess from 10 to 6, where I'm managing other artists who are helping me with my projects. Okay, so learning to delegate is very important. I have a friend of mine he's amazing, incredibly gifted comic book artist, but he takes a long time to do his work. And the problem with that is that it's literally going to take him a year to do each book. And if he could just find a way to hire an inker, he could double his speed. If he could find a way to hire a letterer, different people on the team, somebody to help out with backgrounds. The consumer doesn't care. The person buying the book, what matters to them is the quality of what it is that they're getting. And if they love that you're working with a background artist because they get more books from you and those backgrounds look like they're dedicated, focused, somebody really put a lot of time into that, it could end up raising the quality of your book altogether. So consider working with an assistant and never, ever assume that they'll do work for free or get paid on the back end after it's a success. You have to somehow find some money to actually pay the people that you're working with and pay your assistants and pay them well. And that's a whole different video about just keeping your team motivated and keeping your team focused and working with people. But very important stuff to develop, especially if you want to have a good balanced life for everybody working with you, okay? And this is especially helpful if your comic sells. If it doesn't, then I hope you got another source of income or some money saved up. Okay, so then we've got Thursday and Friday weekdays that are focused mostly entirely on just a manuscript. This is working with your team to get that final polished, inked look and double checking that all the lettering looks good and the dialogue is good. This is all that stuff fits into there. And then we've got Friday at the end of the day, bam, that is your work week. We don't work on Sundays. That's the Lord's Day, okay? And the day of rest. And you need a day to go out and see movies. You do need a day to play video games, to dig into something meaty, get into some Assassin's Creed or go out to a ball game or even just spending time with your kids or your family. I neglected that a lot in my 20s, and you might still do that in your 20s, but when you get to be a little bit older, you start to realize just how important all that is. And then especially if you've got some successes under your belt behind you, then you start to go, wow, you almost regret working too much, and you want to give more time to the things that matter. And this might also even be, by the way, I don't want to say, hey, you never touch pencil to paper, because you do. I love to draw. I love to paint. I love to do side projects, and I love to develop indie games in Unity. And on Saturdays and Sundays is when I'm putting in time on the other things that I love, and I'm developing techniques, and I'm developing skills, and I'm reading books, and well, let's be honest, I'm listening to audiobooks, but that's when I'm really putting in that time on that. And we want to be careful to not let that mix too much during our work week. It's pretty healthy to have a nice solid 8-hour work day, You'll notice that I have some scenario things sitting in here, because a lot of times that might happen. That might even happen, after. A lot of times this happens to me. By the way, I'll get this. Let me grab it real quick. Sometimes I'll get this 3 hours happens to me at 1 or 2 a.m. or something like that. And that's not good. But it happens, and sometimes you want to jot those ideas down, and that's your scenario. I'm plotting out my next comic, Creed number 3. There's a good chance that might happen, and I've got all these ideas for storyboards and scenarios that are happening. What kind of events do I want to happen in that book? Those are going to happen in your free time too. And you'll notice one more thing I wanted to touch on here. All this is set up to a pretty consistent schedule. When we look at this compared to Mr. Shibashi's schedule, he has a lot of his breakfast is not at the same time every day. Sometimes his dinner's at way later. I don't think that that's good for you, man. I think it's good to have some consistency. You want to set up a good circadian rhythm. Even if this schedule is a little bit different for you and you're well, maybe I just need a little bit less sleep. I have friends who only sleep 5 hours a night. That's fine, man. You're going to have a lot more of this production time. You're going to be able to fit in a lot more development time. If I'm to be honest, a lot of my schedule ends up being something where, I go right back to work after dinner all night. And maybe I only get, 1 hour a day some days where I'm playing video games. I do enjoy gaming. I enjoy my industry. I enjoy what I do, or, when I want to run out to the comic book store or the retro game store. And these things are important. So don't neglect them. The point of this video is not to say you should have this schedule. The point of this video is to say, maybe you should track what kind of schedule you are actually doing. When you're talking about pursuing a production, if you're talking about making a comic book, because I know far too many people who are talking about making a comic book, but their realistic schedule is a little bit more closer to something like this one, where you're only really working on it for 5 or 6 hours a week. And that's actually more than that. That's 10. But I know people who only do 4 or 5 hours a week, if that, on their comic. And if that's all you can spare because you got a day job, well, then I hope it's scheduled, and I hope it's something that's compounding, and I hope you got a plan for how you can put a little bit more time into it. For some people, you may be looking at scheduling all of your time onto your weekends. But keep in mind that if you sacrifice your health to achieve your goals, you're going to regret that too. And you do have to do exceptional things. And the last point that I wanted to make is that it's not even about the hours. When we look at this schedule, this may even work for somebody who's really efficient. But this schedule, which is a reasonable 40 or 48 hour schedule per week, 48 hours per week schedule, that may be more than enough time if you're extremely fast, if you're very efficient, if you're working digitally, if you're using a lot of tricks, if you're using a lot of models, for instance, or other techniques that I talk about a lot in my videos. In fact, I have a workshop about the Photoshop cheats. These are techniques and tricks that will double your speed. So even if you're only working 40 hours a week on your comic, you might find that you're doing 80 hours worth of work. So it's about the quality of the time that you're putting in. So consider checking out my Photoshop cheat box. That's going to help you to speed up if you're doing a comic book, if you're doing concept art. I worked in comic books and I worked in concept art for video games for many, many years. And I'll tell you what, man, your efficiency is one of the most important things that you can invest in. Learning ways to work faster, learning ways to get final product that's of high quality with less time involved, invested from yourself. So you can focus on the concept itself, so you can focus on the flow of the story itself, so you can focus on the consumer's view of what it is that you're making and less about struggling with the tools. That's why I do what I do here on my YouTube channel as well. So I do want to encourage you to subscribe. We talk about these kind of things all the time. And I hope that this video helped you or at least got a dialogue going, something that you can think about, like how you can work a little bit more effectively and a little bit more efficiently. And dudes, please let me know what you thought of this kind of a schedule. Some of you might, if you think it's lazy, come at me, bro. If you think this is like, you know, too hard, too hefty of a goal, too hefty of a schedule, if you think this is too crammed, you know, let me know there too. It's going to be different for different people, but having that dialogue with yourself and having that dialogue with other artists, you might find there are better ways that you can do what it is that you're doing. And I'm always revising this. I'm always growing. I'm always developing this. I have a little bit of a different technique that I use using Post-it notes, which I've talked about recently, and flashcards that help me keep me on track. I have a pinup board where I track my schedule and my projects because I jump around to a lot of different projects. But maybe something like this could really help you to get on track to finishing your comic. And I genuinely hope that it does. That's what I'm here for. So dudes, don't forget to subscribe. And I do a video like this every week. So I'll see you next Wednesday. All right, ciao, baby.